Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. All right. Appreciate everybody jumping in and welcome to today's Rupa University Live class presented by Rupa Health, the simplest way to order specialty lab work. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Today, we have a very special guest in Dr. Alan Meglin here to provide an introduction to epigenetic aging and review ways to turn back the clock with true diagnostics. So before jumping in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you do have any questions, use that Q&A button in the menu bar, and we'll host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Immediately following the Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order this test on Rupa Health. And if you have to jump early, no worries. We will be sending out a recording of the session along with the slides within the next few days. So additionally, if you are a fan of this type of content, please be sure to check out rupahealth.com to get access to all the previous sessions that we've done. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Meglin. Dr. Meglin graduated AOA from University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. He did categorical surgery at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, followed by diagnostic radiology. He trained in interventional radiology at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. After a career in the Army, he went into private practice, specializing in imaging-guided procedures. He has done research and is published in radiology, interventional radiology, and regenerative medicine. He owns and operates several regenerative medicine clinics in Georgia and North Carolina, and he is board certified in radiology, interventional radiology, and regenerative medicine. So quite an accomplished physician. Now with that, I will pass that on to Dr. Meglin. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very excited to learn today's topic.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here. So before I go anywhere, I just need to tell you a little bit about me and go through some disclosures. So I'm Alan Meglin. I want to thank Rupa, TruAge, Brian Smith, and Hannah Wendt for inviting me. They've been really amazing to work with. Just so you know, I'm an interventional radiologist by training, but I would ask that you not give up on me right away. I want to remind you that Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize for induced pluripotential stem cells, was an orthopod. By way of disclosures, my only relationship with Rupa is as a customer. My relationship with TruAge is largely as a customer, although I hope to be entering into some research protocols with them. I'm a founding member of RADAC, which is a biotech consulting company specializing in helping new biotech companies get started in the commercial area as well as clinical applications. And I'm a customer and researcher for Organocell, BioT, and Foundation Biologics. Okay. With that as a start, I want to give you the few take-home messages that I want you to have. I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to end with that. And my hope is that you'll retain at least these 6 things. The first question is, how do you measure the health of an organism? And my answer to that is adaptability. The more flexible and adaptable the organism can be, the healthier it is. And that's going to be an underlying theme throughout the rest of the talk. A second important point that I'd like you to take home with you is that in general, intermittent stress activates survival pathways, and that improves the patient's, or in this case, the organism's ability to adapt. My understanding of aging is I've broken it down into 2 essential processes. The first is, which is known as autophagy, or removal of non-contributing neighbors in the cellular neighborhood. And the second process is replacement of those non-contributing neighbors with new and vital cells or citizens. The next take-home point is biologic age, which I believe to be the single greatest risk factor for death. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The next important take-home is that I believe that epigenetic clocks will become the gold standard and supersede almost everything except the tricorder for how we evaluate patients. The last thing that I'd like to impart is that epigenetic data allows for us to use evidence-based medicine with an N of 1. Most evidence-based medicine today is based on large clinical trials with large male populations. And we look for average responses and determine if an intervention is effective or not based upon the average response to this large population. We know from other studies that if you look at medical recalls, 80% of them are in women. And the reason for that is that clinical trials, which were used to approve that medication, are done largely in men. And so we're taking this large male population as representative to everyone. Well, the big jump with using epigenetic data is that we can get evidence-based medicine with a single patient. We can look at a patient, look at the intervention, and see how they respond. So that's my take-home messages, 6 important points as a first pass. And you'll see that these are underlying as a theme in the rest of the talk. So today's topics, we're going to start with the importance of biologic age. Then we're going to do a DNA refresh for folks like me who hadn't thought about DNA in a long time. I'm going to describe epigenetics. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can determine a patient's biologic age. And then I'm going to remind you that it's important to disregard mom, do not act your age. Okay, so we'll start with this. A Nordic population was asked how long they wanted to live, and the average answer was 91 years. Well, the current average lifespan is 77.3 years. That was in 2020, and it went down from a higher number in the last few years. So how do we close this gap? If people want to live to be 91, but they're only living to 77, how do we close that gap? Well, that's the basis of this talk. Who cares about biologic age? Well, we all do. We've been using chronologic age for years as a risk stratifier. We've been saying, okay, this person's 70, they'll have the diseases of a 70-year-old, and they're at high risk for cardiovascular disease, cancer, so on and so forth. Well, it turns out that chronologic age is not that accurate a predictor for health outcomes. And in fact, biologic age is a much better predictor. And so it's been said that 5 to 10 years from now, the health system that doesn't use biologic clocks as their data point for risk stratification is going to be archaic. All of this is powered, by the way, by TruAge, and that cartoon on the right of the screen suggests that TruAge is helping us turn the clock back. So why do we care about biologic age? Well, what we really care about is not longevity. What we care about is our health span. And what that means is it doesn't matter if you live to 100, if you feel like you're 150. But if you live to 100 and you feel like you're 50, that's a very valuable period of time. In the Middle Ages, our health span was not quite as long as it is today. Our health span is significantly longer than it was a long time ago. But you note that in addition to the health span improving, the lifespan has improved. And so the lower quality of life that exists today at the end of our lives can be corrected. There are some that believe that aging is a chronic disease, and I'm one of them. So when we talk about aging as a chronic disease, what are some of the things that accelerate the biologic age, not chronologic age, but biologic age? We know that smoking does, cancer does, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and as we're going to talk about it a little bit later, in a subset of the population, COVID accelerates biologic age. So here's one of the fundamental points that was relatively shocking to me. Aging is not a one-way street. It is not, we only get older. It turns out aging is a more circuitous path, like the sign on the right. When we age, we can jump forward and age more quickly and age accelerate, but we can also age decelerate and actually age reverse. So aging is not a one-way street. The most typical measure that we use on a day-to-day basis is phenotypic aging, manifest by these faces. If you look at the top row, this is the same person who has been aged by computer. She's chronologically 45 years of age, and the middle face is a 45-year-old. The face to the left is a chronologic age of 45, but a biologic age of 35. The face to the right is a chronologic age of 45, but a biologic age of 55. And we do this intuitively as doctors all the time. Somebody comes into the office and we do an age assessment, and we learn to say very early in our medical careers, the patient appears age appropriate, or the patient appears in distress, or we describe their phenotype, but we also describe their chronologic age. So typically we would say a 45-year-old female who presents appearing age appropriate. It turns out phenotypic aging is not that good a predictor for health outcomes. Aging is the #1 risk factor for almost all chronic diseases. We know that if we can reduce your biologic age 7 years or less than your chronologic age, the incidence of stroke, heart attack, cancer, diabetes, any chronic disease goes down by half. So it's our mission to decrease the biologic age at a rate that's slower than the chronologic age. This is important to governments. Federal government should be all over this, looking at this in terms of cost. If we can decrease someone's biologic age by 1 year, we would save almost $260 billion per year. So shifting from chronologic age or phenotypic age to biologic age can have profound economic as well as individual outcomes. So let's just talk about age for a second. We really begin with the fertilization of an egg. That one cell, that single cell, the ultimate stem cell, goes on and divides to multiple daughter cells, but also multiple stem cells. That's really age 0. From that single cell, we start developing multiple cells with multiple cell lines. How do they know what to do? Well, the answer is stem cells have a perceptive capacity. They can tell what's going on around them. They can sense the secretome that's surrounding the stem cells, and they can direct each other to form tissues and then subsequently organs. They do this largely through the release of small packets of information, which when they fuse with the cell membrane can be called exosomes. So the ultimate stem cell is a fertilized egg, which over 40 weeks can go on and develop an entire human being and a placenta. And that's age 0. It turns out that the processes that happen antenatally, the processes that happen in your mother's womb, can have a profound effect upon your biologic age. As early as 3 years of age, there can be very significant changes in a person's rate of aging that's dependent upon their early childhood stress as well as their antenatal stress. So in this process of stem cell differentiation, we have a single cell organism that goes on to a multicellular organism. That multicellular organism divides into specialized tissues. Each time these tissues move down their differentiation pathway, they lose a little bit of an ability to make other tissues. So this is, in a sense, a form of aging. That single cellular organism that's differentiating into an entire human being. You can look at that as aging, increased differentiation of cells. Well, Yamanaka described, he got the Nobel Prize in 2012 in physiology for this discovery in 2006. Yamanaka found that proteins expressed by certain genes can reverse that process. I'm going to go back one. Yamanaka demonstrated that you can go from skin cell back to stem cell, or fibroblast back to stem cell, by introducing only 4 genes, the most important of which is OCT3/4. So in terms of turning back the clock, we can go from an undifferentiated, multipotent stem cell into a differentiated cell. That's aging forward. We can then age backwards and go from a differentiated cell back to a stem cell with the implantation of only 4 genes. If that's not turning back the clock and making people younger, I don't know what is. So just to recap, it's really important to know what biologic age is. It's far more important to know biologic age than chronologic age. the biologic age is a much better predictor of the patient's phenotype and their health outcomes. So how do we determine biologic age? I'm going to do a very brief DNA refresh for those who are not PhDs. PhDs, this is the time for you to run, take a break, go get ice cream, because this is going to be at a pretty low level. But for other folks like me who were radiologists before becoming Regen Med docs, a little DNA refresh is helpful. So the central dogma regarding DNA, the dogma that I learned in med school, was that there is a gene. Typically, it's made up of codons, which is 3 base pairs, and each gene codes for a particular protein. And what happens is you have a DNA strand, you make a copy of that with RNA. The RNA goes into the ribosome. In the ribosome, you assemble proteins that match, you assemble amino acids into a protein that match the RNA sequence. So it really was thought to be 1 gene equals 1 protein. It turns out that's not true at all. There's some debate about how many genes we have. Most estimates range between 20 and 25,000 genes, but we encode for over 100,000 proteins. Here's another important thing. Mosquitoes have about 18,000 genes. So you would think that we're vastly more complicated than mosquitoes. We should have a lot more genes if the central dogma was true. Turns out that there's a lot more to DNA than the simple codons. We're going to talk about that in a second. I'm just going to mention a word now that may be foreign to some of you, and that's histones. And I'm going to tell you as a central tenet, biologic systems don't waste. We're going to come back to that in a second. So for 50 years, we were following the central dogma, and we thought that the code of life were related to nucleotide base pairs and codons, and genes were kind of a fixed transcript, and we just had to read that transcript. It turns out that's not true at all. The genes are much more like letters of an alphabet, and DNA is vastly more complicated than we initially thought. It doesn't matter so much what the actual codons are, what the actual genes are. What's most important is how we assemble them. So it turns out that the majority of DNA is not necessarily coded information. The majority of DNA are instructions for what to do with those codons. Now, just a quick reminder, DNA is a double-stranded helix. It has 4 base pairs within it, 2 purines, 2 pyrimidines. They line up in a very specific way, and an assembly of 3 of these base pairs is called a codon. Well, that's a little bit less than half the story of DNA. It turns out that DNA is tightly wound around proteins called histones. They're octamers, and these histones play a large role in DNA regulation. I've shown you a picture of a histone with the DNA together called a nucleosome bead. Well, it turns out the regulation of what codons are interpreted and in what order is a very, very important part of how we actually go from DNA to protein creation. There are 50 different types, more than 50 different types of histone modifications. Histones in general are either acetylated or deacetylated, and they're organized in such a way so that they open up and allow transcription to happen in the DNA, depending upon if the histone is turned on or off. Another important DNA regulation site is at the nucleotide base cytosine, in which you can methylate the DNA. And those 2 things help determine whether you turn a gene on or a gene off. I've been fortunate enough to do some exosome research in which we treat patients with various microRNAs, and the microRNAs turn out to be a very important regulation factor at the promoter site. So what happens with these histones? The histones have these tails that hang off, and we can open the histone or close the histone, rendering it accessible to the DNA. So if you look at the top picture, the histones are relatively closed, and the DNA, which is negatively charged, is closely applied to the positively charged histone, and there's no way for any proteins or enzymes to get in there and translate the DNA. If you open the histones by opening their tails, it allows space for DNA transcription to occur. So here's the deal. This DNA, which is a combination of histones as well as nucleotides, are highly, highly regulated and changeable. Without changing the codons at all, you can change the effects that the DNA has in a big way. About 60% of our DNA interpretive capacity is under our control. There are things that we can do that will turn on regenerative genes or turn off degenerative genes. 40% we got from our parents, our grandparents, and their grandparents, and that's encoded in the DNA. The genes are sitting there. It's a matter of whether we interpret them or not. But the important point of this is 60% of our DNA is under our control. So I guess the main point in this is that DNA has a very dynamic life. It can be transcribed. It can have genes turned on. It can have genes turned off. It can resist transcription. And interestingly, mistakes are expected in the DNA transcription system. There are faulty transcription factors that are designed to make mistakes. And then there's a cleanup system that comes on and repairs the DNA. Well, the reason for this is so that we can have mutations driven in part by our environment. We make mistakes, and DNA transcription is not as faithful as we used to think. We make mistakes, and then we come and fix the mistakes or not. And if we don't fix the mistakes, well, that can go on to a mutation. And there are control mechanisms for whether we fix the DNA or not. So the process of mutation is not nearly as random as we thought. The process of selection of the fittest is not a random and statistical process. It's closer to Linnaeus' version of evolution than it is to Darwin's. Okay, so what we've talked a little bit about is how important it is to assess biologic age rather than phenotypic or chronologic age. I've given you a little of an overview of what goes on in DNA. It's no longer the central dogma of one codon, one gene, one protein. I've explained that there are planned opportunities for mistakes to be made and mutation. And there's also planned opportunities to regulate the DNA. And over half of the DNA molecule is made up of proteins which are involved in the regulation of DNA. So now let's talk a little bit about epigenetics. Genetics is really what's going on in the DNA itself. Epigenetics is really the study of DNA manipulation and how it's expressed. The best example of this that I know is the transition from caterpillar to butterfly. The caterpillar and the butterfly have identical DNA. There is no change in any of their gene structures. The codons are identical. The DNA between these two vastly different organisms is identical. So what is the difference? The difference is the order, the number of times a gene is expressed, which genes are turned on, which genes are turned off. All of the information for both caterpillar and butterfly is there. It's just a matter of which genes we interpret and which ones we don't. Just in terms of DNA regulation, I just wanted to mention that histones can be acetylated, methylated, phosphorylated. Histones in general exist in a deacetylated state. The opening of histones allows for transcription. At the DNA level, you can have methylation, phosphorylation, microRNA. But all of these potential biologic clocks, it seems that DNA regulation with methylation is the most important. So what happens here? In order for DNA to be transcribed so that you can eventually make a protein, you have to have an enhancer zone of the DNA and a promoter zone of the DNA, and they need to kind of face off against each other in this loop. And then you have all kinds of control mechanisms called transcription factors that allow this DNA to control what genes are transcribed and what genes are not transcribed. I'd ask you to look at that promoter level on the bottom, that big bubble, because that's really the target of DNA methylation. All right, so what's DNA methylation? DNA methylation is where you take a methyl group, and I'm going to show you the biochemistry in just a second. You take a methyl group and you attach it to the cytosine residue. And when you do that, you can effectively turn off a gene by making the promoter portion, which is just upstream in the DNA from the gene, taking the promoter, turning the promoter portion off. You can also turn on access to the DNA by histones, and also you can use microRNA in this area of transcription factors and activators to decrease or increase transcription. So what's going on with epigenetics? Well, the codons that are in the DNA are really like the Library of Congress. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while, and this is a picture of the Library of Congress. The codons have all of the information. Every book ever written is in the Library of Congress. Every cell in your body has the same identical DNA. You can best look at the DNA as your hard drive, but all of the other DNA regulation mechanisms can be thought of as the CPU. Inputs at the cellular membrane can result in what amounts to perception and interpretation, and the response to that can be what parts of the DNA are transcribed and what parts are not. So we've been able to correlate the epigenetic phenomena, the DNA activation or inactivation, using methylation patterns. So what happens in methylation? So the cytosine residue in the DNA can be methylated from S-adenosyl methionine. A methyl group can be attached to the 5 position of the cytosine, and by doing so, you can turn off the promoter sites. There are areas that have what are called CPG islands, and that's cytosine phosphate guanidine. And what happens is if you methylate the cytosine in enough of the CPG islands, you can turn off the promoter zone and turn off the gene. It's a form of gene silencing, as it were. The thing that's interesting about methylation is that it's relatively long-lasting, and therefore it is heritable. So the experience that you have in life can literally change your DNA, and you can pass that DNA epigenetic information onto your offspring. It's a mechanism for adaptability for human beings. Okay, so that being said, what we've done with companies like TruAge is they've looked at the methylation patterns in over 900,000 places on the DNA. They look at that methylation pattern and they use AI and outcome, phenotypic outcome, health outcome information, and they're able to find correlations. It's not cause and effect, it's correlations, so that they can look at how much DNA methylation has occurred and where that DNA, which genes that DNA has methylated in their CPG islands, and from that, compare that to health outcomes and therefore understand your biologic age. Now, just to talk a little bit about the utility of this approach, when you methylate the genes, you can correlate that with a patient's age, but you can also correlate the methylation pattern of DNA with other processes such as cancer. So if you look on the left-hand side where it says aging, you can, in response to various stresses, such as decreased caloric intake, you can control how much DNA is methylated and how much is not. And that can be used to determine your biologic age. If you look down the other side, DNA methylation patterns can also be correlated with the presence of cancer. And so you can use DNA methylation patterns in circulating blood to detect cancer at very, very low levels. What happens with cancer epigenetics is that because cancers have a relatively rapid cell turnover rate, they release a fair amount of non-cellular DNA into the bloodstream. We can sample the bloodstream and look at the DNA methylation patterns and then predict up to about 50 different types of cancer. We know that methylation is also correlated to age. That was the arm going down the left side. And not surprisingly, cancer is largely a disease of older folks. So how do we do this? We draw your blood, we look at the DNA methylation pattern. So not the genetics, we're not looking for cancer genes. We're looking for which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. It's really, we're looking at the cancer behavior pattern in their DNA, and we can determine if you have a cancer or not. And this is an important test because it will show you very early on if there's a cancer present and what organ it's derived from. So knowing what we know about epigenetic landscape, are there medications that we can use that target processes that have gone awry in DNA methylation? And there are, and they're under study now. But the importance for us at this point is to determine the patient's biologic age. So let's look at two twins. They're monozygotic twins, which means that it came from a single egg and sperm, fertilized the egg, and then the egg split into two stem cells, which then went on to become two identical DNA containing organisms. Early in life, they're indistinguishable, but as we age, based upon the experience that we have, based upon the multiple ohms, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the multiple ohms that we experience, like our environmentome and our proteome and our exposome, based upon our various experiences, those two twins are going to develop different methylation patterns. And those methylation patterns will become, changes will become more prominent as they age. And we can correlate that with age. So what will happen is twins early on will be nearly identical. Over time, their epigenetic clock will change, and they will have, and that's a result of their exposures and experience, and they'll have different methylation patterns. So let's talk about biologic clocks for just a second. One of the earliest ones, the ones that people know in the lay press, are telomeres. And telomeres are the non-coding 6 nucleotide pairs at the end of DNA. And what that does is protect the DNA from over-replication and therefore making mistakes. So we know that there's a correlation between age and telomere shortening. But unfortunately, there isn't a great correlation between telomere length and health outcomes. So it's not a great biologic clock. It's not the best biologic clock. It's an important one. It's an important piece of our data set. But the correlation with health outcomes is not that great. Before, when we were talking about histones, and we talked about the histone modifications, biologic clocks can be made from histone modifications too. The older you are biologically, the more you'll see histone modifications. Unfortunately, it's harder to do and more expensive and highly variable. So although people are using histone or proteome biologic clocks or metabolism biologic clocks, the best seems to be DNA methylation. And that's also the most well-studied. The best clocks are descendants of what's called Grimm age, discovered by Horvath. And what he looked at was DNA methylation patterns versus health outcomes. And he found that individuals of the same chronologic age had very different biologic ages, as illustrated in this diagram. This is a young, if you look at the bottom, the silhouette of the female is a young female of the same chronologic age, but a different biologic age from the silhouette at the top, in which it's biologically older female. Even though the DNA is identical, the DNA methylation pattern is different. And it turns out that that methylation pattern is highly correlated with a series of health outcomes, as well as a series of senescent markers. So that data was first published by Horvath. He was using Hannum's biologic clock and modifying it with certain other inputs. Using similar data, PhenoAge, GrimAge, Dunedin Poem were all developed as biologic clocks. The best seems to be the Dunedin Pace, which is what's used in the TruAge biologic clock. Okay, it's important to remember that biologic clocks are correlations with changes in DNA methylation pattern. It's not a cause and effect process. So why is this important? Well, those that have a faster pace of aging, those who are aging biologically faster than they are chronologically, have significantly increased health risks and significantly poor health outcomes. This is important because we know that we can manipulate up to about 60% of our DNA expression. And we know that if we can reduce your biologic age by 7 years, your risk of death for all causes goes down by 56%. What we want to do is keep our biologic age as low as we possibly can. So what is this Dunedin pace? Well, Dunedin is a place in New Zealand. This is the train station there. And what they did was they compared a cohort from 1972, 73 birth till now. So they have over 40 years of experience of looking at people's DNA methylation patterns and then looking at their health outcomes. One of the things that they've done is they've used 19 indicators of organ system integrity, meaning an older liver is not going to work as well as a younger liver. And they look at organ systems to determine health outcomes and then compare that to DNA methylation patterns. Turns out that those with faster age rates do not as well as those with younger age rates. And that age rate phenomena is in part determined by antenatal events and childhood stress. There is one intervention that we know that can change the pace of aging, and that's really our goal here. And this is an example. On the left, you see a fast ager in blue and a slow ager in black, and you can see their aging rate with normal diet, ad lib diet. When you compare that to people who have undergone 20% calorie restriction on the right, you can see that their age rate slows way down. In particular, the people who are aging faster than they should have a profound effect with calorie restriction. So we're going to talk in a minute about multiple different ways to change your rate of aging. The important point here is to know that that rate can be changed. It's under our control, and calorie restriction seems to be a very important factor. So can we reverse age? Well, we can. Yamanaka showed us that we can reverse differentiated cells and make them undifferentiated cells. That's the ultimate reversal of aging. We can reverse other processes that add to senescence. I in particular am interested in mitochondrial disease. I treat mitochondrial dysfunction and try and drive mitochondrial health. By driving mitochondrial health, I can drive cellular health. By driving cellular health, I can drive tissue health. And I do that using hyperbaric oxygen, hormone optimization, red light therapy, as well as a bunch of metabolic phenomena. So this is what I was talking about with the multiple omics. There's genomics. That's where we spent about 50 years studying the genes. We've not that long ago decided that epigenetics was probably at least as important as the underlying genomics, but there's also transcriptomics. That's the process where we're making proteins, transcribing them from DNA. I talk a little bit about that with microRNA. There's proteomics, metabolic omics, and phenotype omics. These are all ways in which we could develop biologic clocks. And that's important to the biochemists. Important to the doctors is that we can affect a person's individual biologic clock at each and every one of these levels. Each and every one of these omics represents a treatment opportunity. By combining these ohms, we can come out with the ultimate biologic clock, which will be very, very precise. And the important part of that is that we can shift to an N of 1 for treatments. We can do precision medicine with a very personalized approach. We can measure the person's biologic clock very carefully with great accuracy, introduce an intervention, and then see what that does to the biologic clock. And we can tailor our treatment path dependent upon that person's individual clock. All right. Lastly, I'm going to put this all together and tell you to disregard mom, do not act your age. This is a picture of Robert De Niro de-aging as a result of photography manipulation. But we can try and achieve the same end of de-aging by manipulating the epigenetic clock. One of the many things that we see with aging is a loss of temporal cortical thickness. We see an increase in the number of what are called UBOs or areas of T2 weighted signal on brain MRI. We see sarcopenia manifest as a loss of grip strength. We see balance problems with the 1 foot raise. There are a lot of phenotypic manifestations of aging, which we measure now, but by using biologic clocks, we have a much more accurate epigenetic measurement for biologic clock, which can make our interventions highly targeted. So one of the things that we're all interested in is making sure that we don't get dementia and that we have good brain function. Well, we know that patients' IQs decline after about 40 or 45. There's a slow, steady decline in IQ. But wouldn't it be fun to create some interventions that prevent that, as measured not just clinically and by how people feel, by using epigenetic clocks? So treatment algorithms. A lot of this is under investigation now. The one thing that we know for certain is that the intermittent stress caused by intermittent fasting can have a profound effect upon your epigenetic clock. There are a lot of other treatment algorithms that are being looked at, such as Mediterranean diet, vitamin D, giving methylation factors, growth hormone, metformin, DHEA, stress management, calorie restriction. All of these are known to work in preclinical studies, and there are clinical studies in humans underway now. Things that we think will work are senolytics, and senolytics are the various oral medications that people are taking to reduce inflammation, like curcumin or resveratrol, NAD, things that you can take that will slow your pace of aging. I do hyperbaric oxygen, so I treat a lot of patients with hyperbaric oxygen, and it's my clinical impression that people get much better with HBOT, but those are trials that are underway. A promising new treatment is going to be young plasma. And in preclinical studies, they've taken mice, an old mouse, and they've fused them to a young mouse so that they shared blood, and factors within the blood led to age reversal. The old mouse got significantly younger, and the young mouse got significantly older. And so much the same way that we used to use plasma to try and treat COVID, we would take patients who had survived COVID and try and transfer passive immunity to them. The same way that we use convalescent plasma to help someone get over COVID, we can use young plasma to reverse aging, and that seems to have a profound effect. I started out in all of this as a stem cell scientist, so one of the things that I'm trying to look at now is stem cells and do they cause reversal of aging. Other medications, including rapamycin and cellular reprogramming or gene therapy, are under investigation. But I think some very promising work is going to come out on HBOT and young plasma. So I'm going to take a step back and say, so what do we get when we, in our practice, when we ask for this DNA methylation pattern? A patient comes in, we draw their blood, and these are examples of my individual tests. A patient comes in, we draw their blood, and we get back in about 10 days a report that tells us their biologic rate of aging, as well as their current biologic age versus their chronologic age. Now, you're going to see in my reports that I'm 63 years old chronologically, and I'm 56 biologically, and my wife will tell you that I'm 13 maturationally. So how did I get my biologic age to be 7 years less than my chronologic age? Well, this is me writing slides for this talk in a hyperbaric chamber. We have sit-up hyperbaric chambers in which I can work on my computer or have conference calls. HBOT is one of my favorites for reducing biologic age. This is my actual report. And you can see I'm 63 chronologically, but my biologic age is 56. There's a gap of 7 years. My risk of stroke, heart attack, death is 56% less or reduced over the next 7 years. Now, this is very interesting to me because I'm a diabetic, and we know that diabetes adds to biologic age. So whatever it is that I'm doing, largely hyperbaric oxygen seems to be working. This is an example of my intrinsic age, an example of my extrinsic age. Those are basically subset variations in the algorithm that's used. The extrinsic age correlates well with your immune system. And then this is my maturational age. The slide says Carlton falls for the old rubber scalpel gag. So what did we talk about today? We talked about the importance of knowing your biologic age and using that as a tool. I gave you a little bit of a refresh on DNA. I described to you what epigenetics were, and I gave you some of the vocabulary regarding methylation, acetylation of DNA and histones respectively. I talked a little bit about some of the biologic clocks that are determined by methylation patterns. And I told you not to act your age, do as many interventions as you can to decrease your biologic age with respect to your chronologic age. This is a second pass on my take-home points. How do you measure the health of an organism? And the answer is through its ability to respond to challenges and be flexible. Intermittent stress is healthy, and it's important to cause intermittent stress because your response to that intermittent stress activates survival pathways. As an example of intermittent stress, exercise. Another example of intermittent stress, intermittent fasting. Another example, hyperbaric oxygen. My understanding of aging is that it's a two-part process. You have to clear the garbage out, and anybody who's been to New York City during a garbage man strike knows that the city stops functioning if we're not removing the trash. The second step is that we need to replace new cells everywhere in our body, and aging is reflected by stem cell fatigue. If we're not replacing the trash that we're taking out with new and vibrant cells, that's aging. Our biologic age is much more important than our chronologic age. We've used chronologic age as a foundation in medicine for years, and it's now antiquated. It's my belief that epigenetic biologic clocks are going to replace almost all other medical testing. And I think that TruAge has presented to us a gold standard for how to do biologic clock measurements. Using epigenetic data allows for us to do precise, individualized medicine. Rather than using large trials, we can treat people with an N of 1. With that in mind, I hand it back to Adrian. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meglin. That was amazing. I think epigenetics is one of the most interesting topics within the industry, and it really brings you back to genetic biology 101 my sophomore year in college. So appreciate you taking the time today for this presentation. And so with that, we actually got a ton of questions coming in. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's just jump in. So this is the first question, just so the attendees are aware. We're going to go chronologically through these questions. And if you do have any questions, feel free to use that Q&A button down in the menu bar, and we'll get through as many as we can. So the first question that we have is just regarding, the drug industry. So does the drug industry benefit from resisting reduction of biological age?
Yes. There are monetary incentives to treating an individual symptom or an individual pathology that are those incentives are kind of reduced by decreasing somebody's biologic age. The need for those medicines will go down as the health improves. So yes.
Beautiful. And then the next question was just in regards to one of the tests that you referred to. Is it in the book Younger You?
Yes.
That book.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Next question we got is, what is the ideal difference between chronological and biological aging for optimal health?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
We're working on that. I don't know what the optimal number is. I can tell you that Ryan Smith, who was one of the founders of TruAge, and his partner, Hannah Wendt, gave great lectures and great podcasts on the basic science behind all of this, but I don't know what the optimal number is. I know it's greater than 7.
Yeah, awesome. I'm curious too, this is just a personal curiosity, if it varies by person too. So the next question that we have, and you mentioned the impact of intermittent fasting previously. What are your just personal thoughts on intermittent fasting?
So there's a great book by Walter Longo that describes a Prolon program of intermittent fasting. I think it's important to go at 48 to 72 hours of this fast. Now, you can do a water fast, which is kind of brutal, or you can use the Prolon program, which has fast mimicking heavily caloric restricted diet. So you get to eat something and you're not quite as miserable, but it feels bad. That intermittent stress feels bad for 2 to 3 days. And then it's supposed to feel not as bad. And the long go program seems to abate some of the symptoms.
Yeah. Do you think it's a diet that should be done long term? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think the best path is probably to do it once a month for as many months as you can tolerate it. And then when you're not doing the intermittent fast, then I would recommend the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah. So going back to a new question here, can you talk from the perspective of NRF2 transcription factor in aging?
I can't. I'm going to defer to Ryan.
All right. Next question we have here. What are some of the biggest day-to-day factors that would have the highest impact on biological age as well as chronological age?
So we're looking at that now. I don't know. I can give you an opinion rather than.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So my opinion is we offer a lot of hormone optimization in my practice. And that is the one that people 7 to 10 days out say changed my life. So based upon phenotypic data in which patients just feel so much better, I think that optimizing testosterone and thyroid hormone are probably the most profound epigenetic clock changers.
Yeah, makes sense. Is there an ideal age for an individual to start these therapies?
To start the therapies, you shouldn't start until, in terms of hormone optimization, you shouldn't start until you're at least 30. We know that testosterone declines on average 2% per year after age 30. Other treatments such as hyperbaric oxygen and red light, you could start in childhood.
Oh, wow.
We treat autistic patients, children with autism or other brain issues with hyperbaric oxygen. And again, we're driving mitochondrial health.
Perfect. So going along that same lines, I'm a big fan of your hyperbaric chambers, but for those of us who don't have access to hyperbaric chambers, are there any alternatives that we could help use that would simulate that?
Yeah, you can go to the Dead Sea. Most people from biblical times thought that the health cures from the Dead Sea were due to the hypersalinity, but it's not. The Dead Sea is the lowest place on Earth. So at the Dead Sea, if you never go in the water, you're getting hyperbaric oxygen, you're getting treatment. You could do that. Or there are HBOT centers popping up all over the place. Or you can get red light therapy, or you can choose one of the other pathways and look at senolytics or other related treatments.
Do you have any recommended red light therapies?
Yeah, so I use, there are several manufacturers for red light therapy. You can use a pad, which is battery operated and can be applied to a local area, or you can use total body red light. And I use the Prism Light Pod. It's the most powerful device on the market, and patients love it. That is their favorite treatment. People, it looks like a tanning bed, but it's not. But people come in, they walk in, they say hello, they get their treatment, they walk out. The whole thing takes 17 minutes start to finish, and they love it.
Perfect. Another hyperbaric chamber. Who made the one that you were sitting up on doing the slides in that photo?
Oh, all right. So there are several different manufacturers. I only use the FDA approved chambers, and there are soft chambers and there are hard chambers. And I have a combination of soft chambers that I use for mild hyperbarics, and I have hard chambers that I use for deeper dives. The one that I was sitting in is made by Summit to Sea, and Bruce is amazing. They're really, really personable, good people.
Great.
Anybody who wants to call my clinic, by the way, I'm happy to discuss this offline and get you whatever information I have. Perfect.
Appreciate that. How quickly do you expect epigenetics to shift, and how soon do you recommend retesting after implementing new lifestyle changes?
That's a great question. That's open to debate. I'm retesting people between 3 to 6 months. There are membership models for some clinics in which they test every 3 months. The problem with every 3-month testing is that it may not be long enough to see an effect. And in fact, you might see the reverse effect of what you're looking for. So there's a problem with testing too early. It could discourage people. On the other hand, 6 months seems to be an acceptable interval. And for some of my patients, I'm testing them at 3 months.
Oh, nice. So regarding the TruAge report, does it give precision/personalized diet and lifestyle recommendations to the client based on methylation pattern findings?
It does in some cases, and they're working on developing lots of new tests. And one of the amazing things about TruAge is that once they have your DNA methylation pattern, they have it. And so as they apply new algorithms to that same data, they can come to different conclusions. So they're about to come out with a smoking related methylation pattern and an alcohol exposure related pattern. And I know they're working on several different areas. And so you can get an individualized understanding of why you're aging when you're aging, and therefore make corrections. But if your biologic age is advanced compared to your chronologic age, the 3 simplest things that you can do is make sure you're getting adequate sleep, 7 hours. That's so that it's not you're not harming your sleep. That's really essential. You're trying to stay as close to a Mediterranean diet as possible, and moderate but not severe exercise. So the 3 best biohacks are pretty easy. It's diet, exercise, and sleep.
Love it. Last couple questions, and just for those y'all who are able to stick around, we're going to show you exactly how to order these tests that Dr. Meglin has been discussing directly on Rupa Health immediately following the Q&A. So we've got about 3 more questions coming your way.
Great.
Do you see HBOT therapy becoming an at-home therapy in the future?
Absolutely. And I have a bunch of pro athletes in my practice, and they all have them at home. And something like 70% of my patients are physicians or their families, and they have them at home. And, you can rent them or you can buy them, and they're not that expensive to rent. Some can be pricey to buy, but not out of the question, especially if you have multiple family members. So it becomes much cheaper to rent a machine and have the husband, the wife, and the daughter.
Love that. Yeah, I mean, I think I have a new goal in life is to have one of those hyperbaric chambers at my home. So last few questions here. Is the PEMF therapy helpful in lowering biological age?
I'm not going to answer that because I don't know enough yet.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. And so last 2 questions here, and again, I'm not sure if you can answer this one either, but is there anything that can be done for prostate cancer reduction?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that either.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And then the last question, which is a very important question, is where can we get more information or certifications in this area?
Oh, so if you want the epigenetic testing, I would say go to TruAge. They have probably 30 different videos that you can look at, as well as podcasts. And I can tell you that Ryan Smith and Hannah Wendt are true geniuses, and they're very personable, and they'd be happy to talk to you about it. But I would go to that TruAge site.
I love that. Well, Dr. Meglin, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Do you have any final last words that you want the people to know?
So I guess I just need to conclude by saying that without my wife, Robin Meglin, I would be nothing. This clinic wouldn't exist, and patients wouldn't receive the profound benefits of RegenMed.
I love that. Shout out to Mrs. Meglin. And thank you so much, Dr. Meglin, for joining us this afternoon, and all the attendees. Thank you so much as well for joining us during this amazing epigenetics conversation. Where we're going to go from here, if you do have maybe 15 minutes to join us, is I want to show you exactly how we can order this test within a matter of seconds on Rupa Health. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can go ahead and jump right in. So for those of you who are still around with us, my name is Adrian Martinez. To give you a proper introduction, I'm the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. And really what that means is that on a daily basis, I speak to practitioners to be that frontline educator regarding Rupa, who we are, what we do, really why we exist. And to answer that last question first, why Rupa exists, it's to help bring functional medicine to the world, make it more accessible for everybody, including practitioners, patients, and even labs, you name it, right? So what we've done to make that mission little bit easier is we've brought on 25 plus labs in one place, allowing you as a practitioner to order all of your labs without having to go to each individual portal. This streamlines everything for you. So now, as opposed to having to go to each individual website to place your orders, you now have one Rupa Health account and you can track and manage everything from here, including, of course, TruDiagnostics. To show you how easy it is to place an order, I'm going to show you that real quickly. So to start an order is right here up at the top where it says start an order. We'll press this button and we just need a few bits of information. We just need the patient's first name, last name, and email address. From there, we collect everything else directly from the patient. This ensures the accuracy of the information and makes it easier for you as a practitioner, right? You don't have to go and find their address and demographic information, so on and so forth. So once we're within this order screen, you'll be able to see an idea of what that looks like. So extremely user-friendly and customizable. So up at the top here, you can create custom bundles. So sets of tests, sets of blood panels, or a combo of blood panels and tests really from any one of the labs that we work with. That way it's one click and all the labs you're looking to work with can be added into your cart, of course, including TruDiagnostic, which is down here at the bottom. One click and that's added directly into my cart straight away. Let's say maybe I want to run a series of other tests on my patient, like a Dutch Complete, and maybe a mycotox from Great Plains, right? 3 different tests from 3 different labs, all at my fingertips. And within a matter of seconds, I'm able to click this button here that says send a patient. And that's how on Rupa Health, we make it as streamlined as possible to be able to order all your labs in one place, of course, including TruDiagnostic, which is the test that we have been chatting about today with that TruAge test. There's, of course, a little bit more that we can do with this order too, right? So for example, we can schedule an order out. We can add notes for the patient, notes for Rupa. You can add ICD-10 codes. So if the patient does want to create a super bill to submit for insurance for reimbursement, we can work with the patient beyond that. But with that, that's how you order the test. Now, what I want to talk to you next about is the other components to Rupa, right? Beyond just a place where you can order all your tests in one spot, it's also a place where you can track and manage all of your results. So again, similar idea here is just aggregating everything in one spot. So as soon as I send an order out to my patients, I have the ability to track the progress and status of all my orders without having to go to each individual portal. Think of this as one streamline and one single source of truth for you to get all of your information without having to go to each individual portal to do so. So I can see when the sample arrived at the lab. If they're providing it, I'll get an expected date of when I can see these results to come in. All this allows you to plan accordingly with your patients and operate more efficiently. Once those results are in, you're notified via email and you're able to view those results, again, all within Rupa. So you'll be able to download the results. You're able to send the results directly to your patients, as well as even scheduling a clinical consultation with the lab. So should you want some additional assistance interpreting these results, we interface directly with the labs. So you can click this button here and chat with one of their clinicians once you get that scheduled on the calendar. So what we've seen so far are 2 key components to Rupa Health: the ability to track and manage all of your lab results, as well as, of course, order everything in one place. There's a lot more to Rupa than just that. And so with that, I want to talk to you about the patient experience. So with these lab testing, depending on how familiar you are with functional lab tests, there are a number of pain points. I've just discussed a few of them, of course, having to go to each individual portal to see your results and order your tests. But a lot of the pain points with the process have to do with the patient experience, right? These tests, let's face it, aren't necessarily comfortable. The finger stick, which TruAge provides, is probably the most comfortable form of tests, let alone, having to take a poop into a cup. Nobody wants to do that. And with that tends to come a lot of questions. So now with Rupa Health, we've built out an end-to-end patient solution. So as soon as you place that order on Rupa Health, we can effectively take it from there. We'll establish communications with the patient, letting them know that the tests have been ordered for them. We can manage billing directly with the patients. The kits will be shipped directly to the patient, so no longer will you have to stock any kits in office. Additionally, we'll send over FAQs, instructions, videos. We'll manage any support questions on your behalf, and then we'll check in and follow up with the patient. All this to say that we've designed a patient experience that's come to be expected in 2022 when it comes to technology, right? So what does it all look like? This is the email that will be sent to your patient as soon as you order these tests. So we'll introduce who we are. We'll highlight the different payment options that we accept. So this is a really important thing to call out. A lot of the tests within the functional medicine landscape are cash pay. And they're expensive, right? So to help lower the barrier of entry to get access to these oftentimes very expensive tests, we offer multiple different payment solutions. So not only can we accept cash and credit, but we can also accept HSA, FSA, and we can even set up a 3-month interest-free payment plan directly with the patient. With that payment plan, we'll go ahead and send those kits out after the very first installment. So we're not waiting for the entirety of the payment to be received. We'll send it out after the very first payment's been received, which is amazing. From there, we'll collect all the necessary information to complete the order, demographic information, shipping information, and of course, billing information. From there, we'll highlight the different tests that was offered. And as soon as they submit that order, we are ready to rock. We'll notify them once the kits have been shipped out. And then after a few days, we will go ahead and send out an email that looks similar to this. So we'll send an email that outlines instructions, FAQs, and actually even videos now for a lot of the tests that we offer, walking the patient through how to take the test. If they do have any questions, they can reach out to us and our team, and we'll actually facilitate answering those questions on your behalf. So that'll save you a ton of time with the patient experience managing all of the support. Beyond that, we'll walk them through how to fill out their requisitions. And if there is a blood draw required, we can even help coordinate that. We can either take the information if you have a preferred phlebotomist location to send that to the patient, or we can send over the options based on the lab that they are working with. Let's say that the patient wants additional options and maybe wants a mobile phlebotomist to come to their house to draw their blood, then we can even help coordinate that by sending over options based on the zip code that they're located in. Of course, with that, we'll be transparent about cost as much as we can. And again, if they have any questions, they reach out to us and our team, so you don't have to. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of what the instructions look like. You'll have access to all these instructions as well. So if you ever want to keep them for your own database, you'll have access to that. So as you can see, they're very comprehensive, but honestly, in my opinion, the fact that they're more user-friendly is just as important. From there, we'll follow up with the patients. And then, as I showed you earlier, you're alerted via email once the results come in. So you'll have access to all of these tests within your Rupa Health platform. So with that, what we've seen so far is, how you order all your tests in one place, how you track and manage all of your results, what the patient experience looks like. But Rupa Health is much more than just a place where you can come and order all your tests and get that taken care of. You're actually all part of a huge initiative for Rupa Health, and that's the educational component. We've built out Rupa University, which all of you that are still on with us are actually being a part of right now, this class with Dr. Meglin. So we actually host these classes once a week, every Wednesday at this same time, 11 Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern time, where we'll have practitioners and labs come on to talk about tests and how to interpret those tests and the real life use cases for these tests. There's a huge need within functional medicine for education, and Rupa Health really wants to be a huge component and add to that opportunity to learn. So at Rupa, you can come in, watch these classes. If you happen to miss one or join late, we always record them and send them out, and you'll have access to the full library here as well. And even beyond just having the live classes, we do things such as podcasts. We have a podcast, which is amazing, top 10 actually medical podcasts within Apple Podcasts. We have a magazine as well, where we're consistently putting out articles relevant to the functional medicine landscape, right? So you can always come on to Rupa Health and continue to learn. And we even have lab essential boot camps. So we're partnering with Dr. Dan Kalish. So if you are interested in joining, you can register today for $2.99. It comes with a free Dutch test. And throughout this 6-week boot camp, you're going to learn how to interpret the GI map and Dutch complete test. So with that, y'all, my name is Adrian Martinez. If you do have any questions, I'm going to drop my information here in the chat. And so if you are interested in setting up some time to learn about Rupa Health, which is a free account to sign up for, please let me know. My email is just adrian@rupahealth.com, and I'm going to drop that in the chat right now. And also a couple other things. Look out for an email coming your way later this afternoon from me with a quick follow-up. And then the days following, we're going to go ahead and send you out a copy of the recording as well as the slides. So here we go. Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Meglin, for sharing out your contact also. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to set up some time to chat about Rupa Health and how we could potentially fit within your clinic and in your existing practice. And if you have any questions for Dr. Meglin, he's added his contact in the chat as well. So we appreciate you all joining us this afternoon. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and hopefully we will see you next week for another chat. And another shout out to you again, Dr. Meglin. That was an amazing conversation and session.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, y'all. Take care.